Hello everyone, welcome to our podcast, The Remote Workers. Today we will be tackling the question, is remote work sustainable? I am your host, Caitlin Ottaviano, and I am joined today by my two peers. Can everyone please introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Sinai Dowry.
I'm Sebastian.
Thank you. Before we go any further, Sebastian, can you help us understand the topic better by defining remote work?
Sure. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, remote work is the practice of an employee working at their home or in some other place that is not an organization's usual building. The presence of remote work has increased due to COVID-19.
Yes, Sebastian. Before COVID-19, 17% of the workforce worked from home in the United States, but during the pandemic, that amount increased to almost 50%. This increase in remote work has opened a complicated discussion about remote work sustainability. Companies are wondering how remote work affects productivity. Are remote workers more productive? Less, do they even want to continue remote working?
Caitlin, your point about the impacts of remote work reminds me of a story I heard about a working family. There is this family, Bob and his wife Betty, and they have two kids under the age of 5 together. Both Bob and Betty work at home at the same company since the pandemic, and they recently got an email from their boss, who we will name Bill for now. Boss Bill wants Bob and Betty to return to the office effective immediately. However, Bob and Betty don't want to return to the office. Bob spent a lot of money on his and Betty's office equipment, and Betty watches the kids all day while working from home. And she's not sure if she can afford or find daycare for the kids. Additionally, the couple moved from their old house in the high-cost suburbs of Massachusetts to a low-cost house in Utah, which allowed the couple to reduce their expenses and live more comfortably. The couple pled their case to Boss Bill and promised that they will remain productive, accept a slight pay cut, or take on a heavier workload. In response, Boss Bill argued that the couple will be more productive in the office and that there are security and liability issues that the company does not want to risk. I just said a lot. This situation explores the different perspectives among the employer, employee, and economy on how the sustainability of remote work is viewed from different perspectives.
Sinai, I loved your story. There is a point I want to highlight. You mentioned that Betty watches the kids, and I know many parents do remote work specifically for this purpose. I'm not saying that all people can't afford childcare, but childcare is expensive, and remote work cuts some of those costs.
I fully agree. I have an aunt with 3 kids, and the youngest has heart problems. Since her job allowed her to do remote work, she was able to watch the kids and remain productive. My aunt never missed deadlines with work. She just had to learn time management and organization when it came to watching her kids and remaining productive with her work.
Does your aunt still work from home, or did she return to the office?
My aunt moved into a hybrid model for work, but she primarily works from home since she has to worry about appointments, sick days, and transportations for the kids. Remote work has been beneficial for her since there are many responsibilities at home that can be more efficiently done with her present at her house.
I do understand your story, but what about Dad? Can those responsibilities be balanced out between the parents?
Caitlin, I would love to say that they balance the responsibilities, but from my observation, the responsibilities mostly fall onto my aunt. The dad does not work from home and has a demanding blue-collar job that pays well but has long hours. So the dad brings home money in exchange for my aunt taking care of the household. I think that this stems from traditional gender roles of the mother taking care of the kids and the dad being the breadwinner. I'm not saying that it should be that way, since any parent could be the house spouse. I'm saying that it's a common thing for childcare and domestic responsibilities to fall mostly onto women.
Sinai, it seems like your aunt's situation is similar to your previous story. While Bob mostly had to worry about money, Betty has to worry about childcare and domestic factors, which I believe also stem from the societal expectations of the role of the mother and father in the household.
Yes, that contrast of gender roles in the house is why I would argue that remote work is sustainable and very beneficial for parents, since it allows parents to stay home and take care of domestic responsibilities.
Sebastian, you mentioned that Bob worried more about the money going in and out of the household. I agree with your statement, but I think it brings up a good point. Forbes author Addie Gaskell mentioned that office costs have shifted from the employer to the employee. Having just mentioned the difference between the employee and employer's perspectives on remote work, I want to now complicate this discussion by straying away from the office place and looking at the bigger picture. How does remote work affect the economy, and is it sustainable?
That is a complexity we should look at. I know the economy is affected by remote work from the employer and employee.
Well, Bob mentioned spending money on office equipment, and Gaskell also notes that spending on office equipment went up when people prepared their homes for remote work. In other words, with the rise of remote work, the furniture and technology industries are benefiting.
Sinai, I want to counter your argument for a second. While the furniture and technology industries are benefiting, it's just as important to mention that many other industries are being negatively affected.
Yes, according to the Massachusetts Taxpayer Association, cities are seeing outmigration of people from cities in high-cost areas to low-cost areas such as Massachusetts. For example, Bob and Betty, the couple moved from their old house to a low-cost area. As a result, the housing markets and inner-city restaurants and businesses are seeing a decline in purchases.
I agree with what you guys are saying. However, according to living costs, the state is a high-cost area with an average living cost between $40,000 to $65,000 in Massachusetts. In contrast, the average cost of living in Utah is $35,000. By moving from Massachusetts to Utah, Bob and Betty saved at least $5,000 annually.
This savings of $5,000 can be spent in other areas of the economy since expenses were lowered.
Exactly, Sebastian. I'm not an economist, but from my economic class, I think a trade-off economic trend is emerging. Small economies are in certain industries are benefiting from remote work. With the increase in savings, simultaneously, larger economies and urban industries are losing money.
So would you still argue that remote work is sustainable for the economy even though some parts are being negatively affected?
I think that the economy will be okay if remote work stays. Even if we got rid of remote work, smaller businesses and economies would be negatively affected because people would move to cities where their offices are. I'm not saying that everyone that works remotely should move to the Midwest. I'm saying that there are some economic benefits and disadvantages to this outmigration of people.
So basically, either way, there are no winners or losers.
Exactly, and many young people want to live their lives in cities before settling down somewhere else. Personally, I want to move to a large urban city, and I'm sure there are others like me. As a result, I think we are seeing a downward economic trend in urban areas. But when younger generations and college students settle in cities or wherever else, there will always be people willing to spend money. Also, we must think about traveling and tourism. Even if people live in low-cost areas, many take vacations or weekends in cities.
That was a very good discussion. I do want to mention another economic advantage remote work has. Bob and Betty mentioned that they moved to a low-cost area. If they are reducing their expenses, there's more disposable income that returns to the economy.
Sebastian, that is an interesting point. However, the couple also mentioned that they are willing to accept a pay cut to continue working from home.
I do see your point, Caitlin, but I don't think that the pay cut will be too much that they cannot sustain their lifestyle. Nicholas Boom, a Stanford economist that performed a remote work experiment in China, says that employees are willing to accept pay cuts. Employees will just have to accommodate their lifestyles to the pay cut. If they are living in a low-cost area, I think employers will now start matching the pay to the living area.
I do want to mention that if the pay is decreased to area costs, workers are also saving money in other areas. Bob and Betty do not have to commute to work, which already cuts expenses like gas, tolls, repairs, and parking. In return, this adds more money to their disposable income.
I think there is another economic trade-off from what we just discussed. If commuting costs are reduced, then it should somewhat make up for the pay cuts. Additionally, the low-cost area helps sustain the workers with pay cuts.
In sum, remote work is sustainable for the economy. However, there are many economic trends and trade-offs as a result, with some winners and some losers.
Yes, when we look at the larger picture, we can see that remote work has many advantages, disadvantages for the employer, employee, and the economy.
I feel like the employer and employee remote work sustainability perspective is similar to the economy situation. They both win and lose depending on the context.
I know Sebastian has done some research on the benefits of remote work for the employees. Maybe he can elaborate on this.
Sure, Sinai. Employees not only benefited financially from moving to low-cost areas and saving on childcare, but they also profited in other ways. For example, a research article I read found that employees report greater job satisfaction, motivation, and reduced stress when working remotely.
I read that article too. I remember it specifically said that increased employee satisfaction was mostly seen before the COVID-19 pandemic, but it went down afterward.
That's an interesting find, Sinai. I wonder why that is.
It's probably because COVID forced employees who didn't want to do remote work to work from home, whereas employees were choosing to work remotely beforehand.
That makes sense, because we probably all know a story about someone working remotely whose job was mostly suited for in-person.
I know a guidance counselor who worked with kids in 4th to 6th grade. She talked about how she really couldn't talk to her students privately during COVID, and the kids that needed to confide about home issues the most would often be the ones whose families would be interrupting her sessions with them.
I can see how a guidance counselor may seem like a career that can be done successfully from home since it's mostly talking, but there's a lot of confidentiality involved in the job that cannot be replicated from home.
Her employers didn't have the plan to tackle this challenge when school shut down either, which also made her career hard.
It looks like just because a job looks like it can be done remotely doesn't mean it can.
Yes, especially since her bosses weren't ready for the unexpected issues that came along with changing the location of a job.
So what you guys are saying is if employees are prepared and in positions that are easily transferable to remote work, it seems telework is beneficial for them.
Yes, and therefore sustainable from the employee's perspective.
But if they are jobs that involve a lot of interaction with other people, or if the employees' lifestyles don't fit with work from home, then telework doesn't serve them all that well.
Do you guys think that employers also agree that remote work can be sustainable if the right needs are met?
I came across a lot of research that says yes and no depending on the context. There are still plenty of times where remote work can't do the trick.
How so?
While staff happiness is important to companies, employers tend to worry more about following the law, profit, productivity, and overall just making sure the work gets done.
What do you mean by following the law?
Being liable for workers was one of the biggest concerns for employers in the research I read.
What kind of liability?
Employers can be held responsible for injuries at an employee's house.
I heard a story about that. This customer injured himself on an employee's sidewalk and sued the employer for it. This case was dismissed, but it still shows why employers would be worried.
I've come across successful lawsuits where the employees got workers' compensation benefits. One guy tripped down the stairs while trying to hurry to answer his work phone. Another person stepped on a needle after answering a work phone call.
If that were to have happened to Bob, I'm sure that Bill wouldn't have wanted to give him workers' compensation for something that happened in Bob's own home.
Right. I can see how employers wouldn't want to be liable for these industries that they can't help preventing.
Yeah, and it's not just injuries either. There are security risks for data leaks and hacks.
There's probably not much guarding for files or a lot of privacy either.
Like any family member, client, or friend could probably overhear confidential conversations.
Right. I've had to give my social security number over the phone before, and I don't like the idea of possibly being on speakerphone or someone being in the room and seeing my info being typed or written down.
Sure. So there are surely valid confidentiality concerns employers have.
These concerns are severe enough that over half of employers surveyed by Qatar Consortium cited security risks as one of the main reasons they are hesitant to allow remote work. And it's not just liability and security either when it comes to following government laws. It's hard for employers to follow labor laws and ensure they are following disability access guidelines.
Okay, so there's even more legal troubles firms can get into with remote work.
I know that Betty spends a lot of time messaging her team members off hours. She could probably make this count as overtime if she really wanted to, which wouldn't really be fair to Boss Bill since it was outside of the expected hours. He would have to pay her extra.
Yeah, but then that wouldn't really be fair to her either, to not get paid for the work she did. There's a reason why labor laws like overtime pay are put into place.
Yeah. It can definitely be a challenge for her because it looks irresponsible on her part if the rest of her team is doing extra work, and she's not. It can also put pressure on her socially because she wants her coworkers to like her, and she worries they might get mad if she doesn't respond to their messages, even if they are after hours.
Of course, that's understandable, but is Bob experiencing something similar?
Not from what I know of.
I actually came across a statistic that says women tend to be more affected by increased work demands than men, such as off-hours messaging. So that makes sense.
That's odd. Maybe it's because women tend to be expected to be nicer, so she might look rude if she didn't take on more demands, like responding.
Right. Women are viewed as always needing to be prepared. So maybe if Bob doesn't respond to off-hours messaging, it's seen as him needing to take care of his personal life. But with Betty, it may look like she's being rude and failing at being on top of everything.
I was thinking something similar. Betty's worried about her image socially, which is a common concern for a woman in today's society.
And with this pressure to be perfect in place, that must make it harder for her to avoid going into overtime.
Yes, so I can see why employers would be concerned about how remote work can make it harder for them to follow the law.
It's not just the law either. There's also the concern of losing workplace culture. Staff members don't see each other as often and aren't building relationships like they used to. They could even have less loyalty to a company because of this distance.
I know some employers are worried about losing control of their staff.
Yes. In fact, the Journal of the American Planning Associations found that one of the greatest concerns of employers is that they won't be able to monitor their employees while working.
Productivity is an essential factor for employers, and now with remote work, they have to trust their employees to get it done. If the employers don't have faith and the employees aren't motivated, remote work probably isn't going to help a company make more profit.
Well, not all hope is lost though. An article I read gave several suggestions of what employers can do to minimize these risks. It said there needs to be clear rules for how remote work functions.
What kind of rules?
Employers need to regulate their required hours, remote and in person, ensure each employee knows they need a professional office, decide if remote work arrangements will be made company-wide or just with a direct supervisor, and require employees to start in the office to be trained before earning the privilege of remote work.
Those rules remind me of Betty. If Boss Bill set strict regulations about the hours her team members work, then she wouldn't have to feel pressure to continue working after hours.
And if the guidance counselor had been able to talk about remote work with just her direct boss instead of having to follow a company mandate, she may have had a more personalized experience and therefore had her work from home problems fixed.
And of course, if the workers who filed injury claims had had safer offices, the employers wouldn't have had to pay for workers' compensation.
These rules sound fair. They show that remote work problems can be solved.
Not only can the concerns be fixed, but there are also several benefits employers can reap from remote work.
What kind of benefits?
It can attract more employees that otherwise wouldn't have been able to work. This is similar to what we talked about with childcare. Mothers who don't have anyone to babysit can still get a job, or people with disabilities that aren't able to do in-person labor can still work.
So employers will then have a larger job pool to hire from.
Right, upping their chances of getting skilled workers.
Having more applicants is especially important with today's trends of quiet quitting, retiring early, and fewer people going back to work in general.
That's a good point, Sebastian. I have multiple people in my family that switched jobs during COVID because theirs got too stressful. So finding permanent staff members is a struggle nowadays, and remote work might be able to help.
Since remote work can allow more people to work, it also decreases the chances of turnover, which benefits employers.
To add to that, Caitlin, I came across an old AT&T survey from 1997 that said 36% of their employees reported they would quit if they could not work from home.
That would hurt the company then if remote work wasn't an option.
Definitely. Who knew AT&T benefited so much from remote work?
Are there any other benefits employers can get from allowing remote work, Caitlin?
Yes, remote work can also increase attendance. If you're sick, have an appointment, or even go on maternity leave, you can still do work. Therefore, this access to work can increase productivity, which is beneficial to employers. The International Business Machines Corporation had a survey that showed 87% of employees felt their productivity had increased.
Couldn't it possibly decrease job satisfaction though, if workers are working when they should have off? Because employees not being happy with their job would not help employers.
Yeah, like part of being sick is that your brain is too muddled to concentrate.
And maternity leave isn't all about being physically close to the baby. It's about taking the time to bond with the child, go to doctor's appointments, and rest from childbirth. If employers know they can make their employees work during these times, it may create an unhealthy work-life balance.
Yeah, the Public Library of Science says that women were less likely to experience improved health outcomes from work-from-home arrangements in general, and creating a 24/7 work environment would likely make that worse.
That could lead to unhappy employees, which could then lead to them quitting, which would damage the company.
I see what you're saying, guys. That's why a lot of the research I've come across has said it's important for workplaces to have policies in place to protect themselves and their workers.
So if the workplaces are prepared for how to navigate these challenges, remote work will overall increase productivity?
Yes, teleworking can even make a company more resilient to challenges in general, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Companies that already did remote work were able to function better than companies that had to transition. This applies to other scenarios like bad weather and transportation problems.
Well, there are definitely some advantages remote work can have for their employers and employees. Do you guys think there's one group is more beneficial for?
I think teleworking is equally beneficial for both groups, but overall, depends on the situation.
I agree. If you're part of a group whose situation best fits work from home, like moms, the disabled, someone who lives far away, or in other similar circumstances, then remote work is beneficial for employees.
This situation is also the best for employers, as this will help them gain employees that they otherwise would not have. And these employees are willingly choosing remote work, so they'll be happy with it.
And happy employees are often productive employees. And productive employees lead to a higher economy, which is good for the world.
But then it's not beneficial for either group when the company doesn't have rules and plans in place for how remote work will run, or when the job isn't suited for remote work, because it often results in less satisfaction for the employee and a decrease in productivity for the employer, therefore making it unsustainable in some ill-fitting situations.
So it looks like Betty's and Bob's situation with the needed childcare in a home far away location makes them prime candidates to want to continue working from home.
And their strong work ethic and willingness to make the remote work arrangement continue will ensure they are productive.
Yep, I hope Bob and Betty see this podcast and send it to Boss Bill to inform him that remote work will be worthwhile.
All right, thank you for listening. As you now start to go into the workforce, Remember the pros and cons of remote work as you navigate what's best for you, and let this chatcast guide you on making the best sustainable decision.